indentured servants, right? And then and why they passed those fornication laws and all the issues that led to them. What was the name of the Virginia legislature? The first one in the colonies. And the Burgesses, who were the Burgesses? Yeah, the gentry, they owned land. Those were the Burgesses. And what was the name given to the little piece of land that the indentured servants would get? And what kind of land were they given? Either the band land or land where? On the wild frontier. So what happened?
So they would get murdered and they would take their land.
And how did they, okay, we have this fornication laws. And they want to hide what they're doing, essentially, which is rape. They're raping their servants. And they don't want people to know. How did they keep servants from telling on them? Yeah, go ahead.
More intense, like, punishment for, well, they made the masters pay for them, the servants didn't want to tell because.
Yeah, either the masters had to pay 500 pounds of tobacco, or
The servants would get whipped.
the servants would get whipped.
And then they also have to pay.
And the servants had to pay 500 pounds too.
So there's a
Just
choice.
divide.
Wasn't there a choice? Like they're like either the master pays or the servants?
Yeah. No, actually, they both had to pay 500 pounds.
Okay.
They both had to pay 500 pounds. But the master had a choice. Pay 500 pounds of tobacco, which is a lot of tobacco. Or the servant gets whipped. That is the choice. Yeah.
Would the servants still have to pay the back?
Oh, yeah. They'd have to work extra.
That's technically.
And they're already slaves. So, huh?
That's like so much work that they'll probably kill themselves.
And usually they would give them 2 more years of service. And also they could get 2 more years of service. Meaning to be slave. No, on top. Yeah, but the master might have to watch the servant get wet.
Oh,
So, the servants, what are they going to do? Don't ever say. Gee, I wonder who wrote that law. You think it was the servants? You can always tell who writes a law by who it favors. You can always tell who's really running the country or the colony or the government or the state, local, county. You can always tell who runs it by how they write the laws. Isn't that an amazing law? So basically the masters are raping their servants and the servants can't say anything or they'll be whipped. That's what we call a rigged system.
I wouldn't call that law.
And it's almost amazing the audacity of it. Evil. And by the way, how would they be whipped? Cat of 9 tails.
Aren't those the ones that like hook into your skin?
Well, they might put like a little piece of metal around it, or they might knot the leather to make it that much worse. But you really don't need to.
Yeah.
But the big thing is, 9 leather straps, and they can add. They can embellish it.
They would have different.
And so those are the fornication laws. And so you have these problems, but the big one is now they're basically saying we're going to continue doing this, and we can all act like it's not happening because nobody's going to say anything. So we can all act like we're moral people. We can all act like we're upstanding people. And the system is actually not a bad system. When, of course, all you need to know is about the whole whipping thing. The whole system's based upon whipping and torturing to get people to do this. But let's get to the next one. This is even more important. It's Negro women's children. Because that next part of the law, this is the most important part of the fornication law. The other one is just like, oh my God, can you believe these people? But the Negro women's children is going to have such long-term effect that it's hard to even comprehend. So, the same thing's happening. We have masters raping their slaves, African slaves, and also Indian slaves. They're raping. We talked about what this was rape and everything. I'm sorry, they were involved. Yeah, it's horrific. But
No.
yes. I tried to find the name of the movie, but they made a movie about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Heming, basically raping a slave. And they made it to like this love affair. It was a movie a few years ago that had to be just horrific. I think like 7 people watched it. But I saw an ad for it, like, oh my God, this is awful. So guess what we're watching? So So, same things happen, and there's children. Are the children now free? I mean, it was unclear before. There was no permanent slavery. The children of slaves would probably be free. A lot of the African slaves would get a head right. A lot of African slaves would just be given freedom. But if they had children, they might demand it, and they might have to get an inheritance. But African slaves don't have that one thing that English indentured servants had. What? That written charter, that contract that said they're citizens. And so, they could be much more arbitrary with that law. And what happened? You read that part. This is such a big deal. In Negro women's children, I'm sorry, Negro children, Negro women. What did they say? Yeah. So the condition of servitude of the child was the same as the mother. If the mother's a slave, they're a slave. If the mother's free, they're free. By the way, that should totally dispel anything about this is like race or based upon color of skin. No, the whole thing is about condition of the mother. So if the mother was 99% of European descent, but they were a slave, kid's a slave. It's not color. It was the nature of the law and who was slave, and they had to control. That's a much better way of controlling people. We immediately have that. But then what they did is, by making this law, slavery became what? Yeah, lifetime and? Yeah, kind of different ways of saying it, but permanent, hereditary. Goes on and on and on. You know, when I first heard about slavery, I remember, hearing about this. In fact, it was probably still going on when I was alive, but I'm getting old.
Yeah.
But I always thought it was permanent. I just assumed, right? The other thing I just assume, when I hear slave, and I still do it because it's been so ingrained, I immediately think African. Someone of African descent is probably a slave. That's just been kind of ingrained, No, that wasn't it at all. They weren't slaves because they're African. It's just by nature, kind of almost like an accident of history that happened at that moment. There was an African slave trade developed. They needed workers. A few other things came that worked out that way. Combined laws, and then the fact that they're raping their slaves, which has always happened, and they just turned out that way. But this law changes everything. Everything changed after this one. Let's think about it now. As years go by, white indentured servants or descendants of white indentured servants. So they're no longer that. They don't have much. They're probably pretty poor. Either have terrible land or working as laborers. Very few rights, very few economic and political rights in the early colonial America, or for that matter, the United States. They don't have much. But they're not going to be a slave. We're descendants of African slaves, doesn't matter. Your children will be slaves, their children will be slaves, and so on and so on. And what is different about them? Well, we know the chart. We know that looking back. But just you look at somebody who is a slave and isn't a slave, what's different? Color of skin. More and more becomes color of skin. More and more becomes whites are free, blacks are slaves. Why? There must be something better about being white. There must be something superior about whiteness. I'm not saying that kind of attitude didn't exist before, but it's more like we're Europeans, we're better, we're Englishmen, we're better, or we're African, whatever it might be. But now it's color. White, superior. The laws favor me. I must be free for a reason. Yeah. And it just takes a couple generations. It's shocking how fast this happens. For all of a sudden, it became natural. And that's the thing I want you to get from that. Everybody wrote down that slavery becomes permanent. After a couple generations, they begin to think it's natural. It's natural. It's always been this way. Remember what I said. You think of slave, you think of African slaves. It wasn't like that, but now it's just going, oh yeah, of course. It's horrible. You say, you got this thing where people want to say, but slavery is awful, and so Africans should not be treated that way. No, all slaves were treated that way. It changed. It became more insidious and it became race-based. And what we have developed here is racism. Racism based upon color In fact, this kind of prejudice based on color that we call racism is a development of the slave trade in the New World. That's where it came from. Because think how convenient that's going to be. Ah, good. I can fit. So, that is a development of the slave trade. Yeah.
Although there weren't as many Indians, was it still the same law for Indians?
Well, think about once it happens. Once you have basic, who's on top and who's on bottom based upon color of skin, then the white people could assume naturally on top of all everybody who's not of European descent. So that's how it would happen. The colonists had a very complex view of American Indians. I mean, really complex, because they were also the freest, the most amazing people they've ever seen. And at the same time, they wanted to take the land without their inferior. They had contradictions. But now, think about it. Once you can now say that your quality as a person, your values based on the color of your skin, that could justify taking American Indian land, taking colonies in Africa, taking colonies in Asia, putting one person on top, one person on top. It's a big deal. And this rippled everywhere. As soon as the fornication laws were passed in Virginia and they needed them, which I'll get to in a second, every other colony passed them, including Spanish colonies, Portuguese colonies, French colonies, and that became ingrained. It became normal. And this idea of quality of a person, who you are, your value, your worth, your intelligence, is based upon the color of your skin will come out of this. Did I say this was a big deal? And think about how this has changed over time, over the years. It starts here, and then pretty soon, yeah, it's normal. And one more thing about being natural, and I'll come back to Bacon's Rebellion. Once you say a thing like slavery, and then what's going to come out of it, racism is natural, it's always been that way. Well, what a horrible way to justify what you're doing now. Hey, of course, yeah, I'm racist, but people have always been. I can't help it. We've always been this way. What's the big deal? What a great way to justify something you're doing now by saying it's natural. Yeah, it's always been that way. We expect it. I'm not perfect. This way it's always been. No, it wasn't always that way. These are human choices, mostly based upon economics. And one more thing about these Negro women's children when I talk about economics, doesn't that give masters a financial incentive to rape their slaves? Yeah, more slaves. Slaves are valuable. Just one of many wonderful aspects of slavery. We'll get to it more and more, but we can see the beginnings here. But why this has become so important and ingrained? They passed this law because we have these issues going on. But there is an event that would be a hinge moment that would lead to the enforcement of the fornication laws. 1676, Bacon's Rebellion. It's led by Nathaniel Bacon. And the instigator was the trigger were those headlines. They're on the frontier, they're constantly being attacked, and the House of Burgesses won't do anything. They won't help them. And so this was triggered by the attacks along the frontier. Remember, the headlines are way out there, they're being attacked, and they know we're stuck out there to be basically fodder for attack. You know what fodder is? Food. Like that's what you get the cow, which of course is fodder. But what made this such a big deal was this was a massive class conflict. Class, we're talking about differences of wealth. And there's basically only an upper class and a lower class in the colonies. And the concept of middle class, not really, and I'll explain that more later on. And the lower class, think about what the lower class consists of. We have, usually they're former indentured servants, but they're free, but they might have terrible land, or the laborers, don't have much. You have indentured servants, you have free Africans, you have African slaves, free American Indians, and free American Indian slaves. All of those are in the lower class. And what made this such a big deal is they all unified together. There wasn't a racial difference, something that divided them racially in 1676. They unified together. Why? Because we're all being treated somehow the same way. We're being ignored, we have no rights, we're given horrible land, we're being mistreated. I mean, there's nothing worse than slavery, but it's like that for everything else. And it's class conflict. It would have worked. They marched on the new capital, Williamsburg, Jamestown is in the swamp, so that maybe we better not have it here. Has anyone been to Williamsburg? A few people? And what's it like there? You remember it?
Like it's like old.
Yeah, they still act like they're in 1700. And so they have all the people are like actors, and they portray it, and it's really cool. It's a really neat place, and you go try to trick them, I tried. They're too good. They all stayed in character. They're looking at big picture. Pretty cool. I bet it's nice. But I didn't want it. I just said you guys can use it. All right, so it was in fall. And the thing about fall was a lot of them, they actually rebelled. And a lot of them left to go do the crops, to harvest the crops. There was a militia in Virginia, this the Indian attack or the Spanish might attack, or the big one, slave rebellion. But there was no British soldiers at all, English soldiers at all in the colonies. And the Burgesses totally panicked. But what they did is they bought off poor people in the James Peninsula and armed them to fight the lower class coming from the frontier. And that's how Bacon's Rebellion was put down. So they were able to buy off one group of poor people to beat the other group of poor people. Everyone got that? That's how Bacon's Rebellion was defeated. And so you think, okay, just a little rebellion, over, moving on. No, this terrified, absolutely terrified the House of Burgesses. And also all the rest of the colonies when they heard about it. What if it happens here? There have already been a couple smaller conflicts like this in Virginia, and not even talking about Maryland, and it happened in Massachusetts too. Massachusetts, big crisis where all these people were saying, hell, you, I'm leaving, and joining a tribe. That's what was happening there. And so, how do you keep this from happening? Because they're outnumbered if all these groups come together in the lower class. What do? You make sure the lower class doesn't unify. What might you pass? Or what were those laws called? Slave codes, and the most important of the slave codes, the fornication laws. That's how they come to be so important. The slave codes would be passed to make sure that the classes, the different groups in the classes don't divide. You put a racial wedge between them. Wouldn't be the only time they would do this. This would be done time after time. During the year, they call it carnivals. I can't even say no. Carnivals of, I'm not saying vols, carnivals of violence. The labor violence in the United States in the late 19th century, they would use black soldiers to put down white strikers so they wouldn't join together. Black soldiers, fresh from Reconstruction and Civil War. So this happened time after time. And it's not the only time it happened. A lot of times. That's just one example. Slave codes. Fornication laws are the biggie. But also, they gave legal rights to whites. And these legal rights would include things like testifying at a trial, a jury by peers, contract rights. And contracts are very important for economic issues. They gave a few more rights to whites. Why? Remember they had that contract in the first place. So they just basically ingrained these rights. So it fits right in what we talked about with fornication laws. Whites have more rights, pretty soon they must be better. There's a reason for it. We're better. Just better, naturally better. And so, big deal, the slave codes. It also strengthened the militia and a few other things. We'll talk more about slave codes later on. This would be a big issue in the events leading up to the Civil War. So, that's where we get racism. That's where it comes from when Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was that hinge moment. Because what it did is, it told poor whites in Virginia, I don't have much, but I'm better than them. And as long as there's slavery, I'm always better than them. Or laws separating the races called Jim Crow laws after the Civil War. I'm better than them. During the Civil War, the vast majority of soldiers who fought for the Confederacy, let's be clear about it, they're fighting, the reason was to keep the system of slavery going. The vast majority, 99%, did not have slaves and never would have slaves. They fought to keep that little bit of status they had left that they thought would disappear, be taken away from them if slaves got their freedom. they would like lose rights to be taken by somebody else. Does anybody know the first high school in the state of the former Confederacy that was integrated after Brown versus Topeka Board of Education in 1957? Anybody know? Anybody know what city it was in? Yeah, it was in Little Rock, Arkansas. The first one, and the people who did it in the Little Rock School District wanted integration to fail. And so they chose a school very carefully. They chose a working class school, mostly with poor whites in it. And they put 8 black students in because they knew those families and people who lived there, they would protest and try to keep those students out. Because, as they saw, my little bit of status in society would be taken away if we left them in our school. What do my children have now? Blacks are equal to them. They have nothing. So the whole idea was then they could turn around and say, see, integration doesn't work. Look what happens. Schools are now more segregated today than they were then. It's hard to even wrap your mind around it, but it's true. We've totally given up integration today. We haven't tried at all the last 20 years. I haven't even tried. So, I don't know, maybe it did backfire. So, this is a big deal right here. Fun and games with racism, right? And this is where it starts, right here. And one more thing. Oh, so what we have then, let's get to it. Here's where we get racism. We've all said racism. I've said it in class. I say it, you know what it means. But people make a common mistake. I do it. I'm not saying people do it. But the thing about racism is this. It's more than just prejudice. It's more than bigoted against somebody, or not liking somebody, or fearing them because they're a different race. It is more insidious than that. It is who's ever in power. And I can't emphasize this enough. Racism is a tool of somebody in power who wants to maintain their power. And what they want to do is keep one race over another race. Divide them, use that, control it, use power to keep one race over another. Yeah.
So is that kind of like what Hitler did with the Germans and the Jews?
Sure, that's enough. Jews are very complex because it's not only religion, but it's also a race. And so, yeah. But you can see it other places too, and it would happen here, you know. And we see examples of racism. You can see it the same thing with sexism, or I'm using the similar kind of tactics against somebody with a similar or a different religion. But racism is one race over another. Somebody in power. I'm not saying somebody who does have power can't be a horrible, prejudiced, bigoted person. But racism is a tool of power. And what it uses is the state, meaning government, meaning laws, the economic system, and social norms, how people act, what they expect, what they're taught in schools. Economic, social norms, but the big one is state. Laws can be passed either directly racist laws that would be passed in the United States, especially after the Civil War, misogynistic laws against interracial marriage, Jim Crow laws segregating schools, playing with voting laws to make sure blacks could not vote. But economic laws, that's a little bit harder to see, especially laws about housing, which after the New Deal, they purposely, it's called redlining, but they made sure that blacks could not live in the same neighborhoods as whites. That would go on to 1968, called redlining. And it was not really a law that said this, but the way they passed the law, it happened by plan. And then social norms, you know, names people call, how people act, what people are told from day one in school. I mean, you see, the best example where I've seen it more in my lifetime since I grew up in Montana, which is, you know, I grew up in Miles City, Montana. God's country, beautiful place. The land of flowing streams and water and screecher monkeys. But, okay, not very cosmopolitan, but I saw certain things, but I really saw that a similar thing would happen for sexism. Women were told they can't do certain things. It just wasn't expected. The game was rigged against women. And the big thing about that is, even if you all of a sudden today I changed the laws and everybody's equal. Well, the legacy's still there. It goes on and on and on. And what? Women make 80 cents on every dollar a man makes for comparable jobs, even though technically, it's very technically they're equal. The average wealth of an African American family is 1/14 the wealth of a white family today. That's a legacy of that. So it isn't like you just flip a switch and things change. It's a big deal. Have I emphasized the fornication laws enough? This is huge. And here's something, a thought process you have to know. I'm going to give an abbreviation because my arm's getting tired. I had to give blood last week, just do a low blood test because I'm getting old. I still have a bruise there. And the amazing thing is, my wife was like, boy, they really messed up. Didn't hurt at all. I didn't even feel the needle go in, nothing. And you keep the whole thing on for 10 minutes, normal thing. And then you figure at least it would hurt. I didn't even feel the needle. Of course, I'm tough. Different generation. You guys wouldn't understand. But this is one of these thought processes. Those of you in AP Euro, you might have known this. A few of you took AP Euro, right? A few of you in here. This is called continuity and change over time. And it's one thing I do want to emphasize. A lot of the things you had to learn in AP Euro last year you have to worry about. But this one, why it's important, I think this is a big deal. I gave it a name because remember what I told you. This is not a class to learn how to take a test. For the AP exam. I'm not okay, now we're going to do this. But I'm doing things to help you. So to me, this is what I see. Literally, I see it like a thread of history. I just see all these things connected. But using their terminology, how we have talked about the fornication laws and racism, and we can see this change, these hinge moments that start with, slavery, labor, finding that cash crop, and then Bacon's Rebellion, boom, then slave codes and fornication laws in force. And we can see how that changed history and how this led to, eventually, what became racism, the slave codes, Jim Crow laws after the war, etc. How this started here, and we see this trend change. We see the same thing for as basic as development of capitalism in the Industrial Revolution, or we see the same thing for foreign policy of the United States and the wars they got into. It's kind of how it changes through time. And I think it's a valuable way to learn something. And also much more interesting. Just imagine if I just went and told you, this is what I told you about the fornication laws. So they passed these laws, they're slave codes, and what they said were that the children of female slaves, every slaves. Okay, let's move on to what would you remember from that? There's a little tidbit. Ooh, that's nice. You might, if I told you about the fornication law, just buy it, ooh, that's awful, then move on. But once you start relating the things down the road, and how this is a continuance of history, it really is. That's why I think it was a roll for a red. It keeps coming through. We can see things today back then. Tomorrow is a new day. When's the assignment due? Right. What are you going to bring tomorrow?
Kit Kats.
Kit Kats. Didn't I tell you that's perfect food? Did I not tell you that's perfect food?
You told me.
Yeah. And then Friday should probably be croissant day. Who agrees with me? Yes. Where are croissants from?
France.
No. So whoever said France is going to be croissants. They're Austrian. Huh? French fries, almost certainly, they're Belgian. They're Belgian. Maybe Belgium, but they also.
I took French sausage. I didn't French now.
But Johnny Rockefeller's cook, as it appears like, cooked something very close to those in the 1880s because he was mad at people. So croissant. Why Austrian? Ottomans. Ottomans.
I brought chocolate. Homemade.
So tomorrow you would basically do this stuff we're going to do perfect.
Oh, good old mercantile. Good old mercantile.
Sending a
My
letter.
favorite.
So no more homework.
Okay, what about the summer tennis?
Oh, that's good. But it's,
I had to give out.
that's
I
all,
love
it's only.
the articles they looked on me. Everything else was fun.
Where were you yesterday?
I was cool for my appendix. Great thing.
It's a very well written out.
Yeah, all of the stuff can't do it. Yeah, like
And it didn't.
no.
Tanisha Lewis, will you please come to the office? Tanisha Lewis, please come to the office.
I know, it's not.
You can keep it, they can-
I want to try to take a picture of it and then drop it on the ground.
Oh. All right, see you Friday. All right, take out your stuff for Breaker Moran. Oh, we have a quiz. It's Wednesday, everybody! Oh, isn't that just horrific? I don't know who did it, but it looks like my head looks like a potato. Well, don't get me wrong, maybe I do have a potato like that, but that seems far too big.
Do we have like
That's hilarious.
Half sheet of paper, yeah. I don't know who did it.
That's borderline the best thing I've ever seen.
Well, I know who came in there, Eve, but not very subtle about it. It was kind of funny. But I don't know who actually did the Photoshop on there. Well, the head looks like really big. I don't abnormally jowly. All right, so hey, when you get older, you get jowly. Hey, get ready for it. And let me tell you, your ears don't stop growing. It ain't fair. Your ears just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Look at LBJ. When he was 20, his ears, you couldn't even see. Right? They're like two little tiny cauliflowers. And then look at them. Yeah.
I got home and my dad found
Oh, cool.
I was like, all right.
Yeah, that's cool. I will look at this. That's really cool. Yeah, I love playing museums. I don't know why.
That was my favorite part. I wanted to like do the like flight of like.
Oh, yeah?
My parents were like, we're not
Guys, I was at this one. All right, everybody, have your paper. I was at this one museum and they had a flight simulator for Netflix. And I thought, oh, that'd be cool. You know, couldn't get it. Yeah, so my shoulders are too broad, now it's too tall. I'm about an inch and a half too tall, and my feet are size 2.
So close.
But the other thing, my shoulders are too broad. Literally, I could not fit. I was like, darn, I really wanted to. Come on. So I was very sad. Yeah, my height was wrong, so even if I could have crammed into it, if I would have had to inject, it would have taken my toes off. I would argue that's bad for piloting a lot. All right. I have good news for all of you. I thought about this quiz and I decided you should draw Vietnam. Did I say that?
Just the country?
I told somebody that. Well, I mean, I think terrain. And I would argue each individual tree.
The scale.
1 to 1.
You want to quiz? I have more good news for you. So I made this photocopy, made the quiz, and I had in my head that I had Da Nang on there. Remember I added Phnom, I put Phnom Penh, it was on that map. I had in my head that Da Nang was. So Da Nang's on here. Number 16. Do not answer number 16. But I might give you a bonus. That might involve Phnom. Sound good? Okay, I'm going to throw this up in the air. Last one with a test. I don't know where I'm going with this. You know, you don't need a half sheet of paper. You can write on this.
Oh, cool.
Save it. Save it. Save it. You are? You are? Great. Great. The big fifth. We will get to Stalin. And what all we gotta say about Stalin is the big fist. That should tell you a little bit about his happy childhood.
Oh, yeah. It's very important. It's like don't sit in front of her trying to solve it.
Sit up. Oh, here's something else I did. I put Vietnam.
It's really good.
Give me a sec.
Yes.
Yeah, just match. Just put the letter next to the number.
Oh, okay.
Why did you get in this class? Are you new to this? Oh, cool. Okay. Remember Sam? I thought maybe you crossed. Okay, this is special topics in American history.
Yeah.
Are you? Okay, good. Hey, take your quiz. We need another one?
No, I'll take 3.
Do 3. All right, this is. You missed the vote. But I give topics and that's what we kind of study. And but I start with, so that's what I do. Quiz. Vietnam, and so let me give you that assignment. And you haven't missed that much. After you're giving the assignments away, give me a second. So have you taken an American history class and yeah, where are you from? What American history? US history. Okay. We hate All right, so we don't hate Bozeman. We just don't care. All right, so and this is just a map. I'm not collecting it, but these are the things that scroll.
So circles or bodies of water?
Yeah, circles of the bottom or some kind of flowing water. This is science. All right, so 4 seat back there. Sound good? That's a beautiful seat. Like you won the lottery. Would you like a bonus question? The bonus question, and you'll circle, you'll label it on your map. Label Phnom Penh. Label Phnom Penh. That was the one that I put it on your map you had to find, and so it's as close as you can get to it. I'll give you a hint. It's not going to be in an area that was a circle. It's not water. And any fish in the building city on water. You understand? Yeah. I want to go there. There's a couple. That's a hint. Bake sales. That. You got one more bonus question? What parallel, so we line of latitude, was the DMZ? What's DMZ stand for? It's not 180, it's not 0. Does that help? Have I narrowed it down? And if it's 360, we have a new circle. You did, Hayden? Yeah. Congratulations. Hey, you look very Sumerian. They were smart. When you enter it over, draw Sumeria. Sumeria. Huh? S-U-M-A-R-I-A. Try Sumeria. That's like it's supposed to be. We're still working on the quiz. I see where I'm in.
That's what Native Americans do.
Yeah, no, they ate all. It's true. Are we done? Want to grade it right now? Sure. I do. Let's grade it. Let's go and exchange. Go and pass it to the person in front of you. Sam, you just get a watch. You'll take the quiz in a couple days. It's not a big deal. All right. Number one. And by the way, somebody who remained nameless did not make the quiz. So I just have to do it. Number one. The Gulf of Tonkin. Number one, D. What did you do? Okay, if you label it all, let me look at it, okay? Number two, K. Number three, F. Number four, A. Number five, J. Number six, C. Number seven, E. 8, O. 9, G, as in G. 10, N. 11, I. 12, B. 13, it's an L. Sorry, that's a book. 14, way, as luck would have it, H. 15, Saigon is M. Bonus question. Phnom Penh should be somewhere right where I have F circle. Just a little bit by F circle, so it's close to there. If it's in Cambodia, give them the point. Yeah,
Can you repeat the first two?
I can. And for you, I'll do it. DK.
Why?
DK.
So is it out of 15?
It's going to be out of 15. The bonus is 1. Oh, I gave you 2 bonuses, didn't I? What's the other bonus answer? Huh? Oh, what's parallel? 17. Anybody get it? Anyone get it? 17. What's it in Korea? Anyone know?
38.
38, yes. That seems to be the news right now.
You're gonna be fine. All the words next to the thing.
Let me look at the one. It's not a big deal. I can figure it out. Probably you didn't pay. Yeah, I'll get it. All right. Good. Look at your test. Go ahead and hand it back. We'll begin the final, or the test on Vietnam. It will be a little bit. Huh? I did say it. 17. All right, hand them up. Who else did it? Hey, yours? You?
Oh, yeah. I did that.
So, the people who screwed it up, give it to me. For pain and suffering, I'll grade you accordingly. All right, let's get ready to watch the video. All right, then what we did is we're watching Breaker Morant. We went back a little bit how the Boer War, how that relates to Vietnam. So the Vietnam War, we're talking a little bit about how that devolved into a guerrilla war. And so this shows like a good introduction to it. And we got right to where they're mostly Australians. Did you catch that little bit of carbineers? Do you know what a carbineer means? Do you even know what a carbine is?
Yeah.
It's like a rifle with a shortened barrel, so it's lighter. It's good for cavalry. Carbineers, light cavalry. What were the name of the Boers? Their militia that the British started to copy? The Commandos. And we have to write, yeah.
What we need 2 examples of?
So 5 examples of how this war was very much, or give examples how this war would be like the American experience in Vietnam, right? Then 2 examples on how it shows the Boers, the enemy, who the Boers are. And we got right to the thing where we have a little bit, guy who plays Breaker Morant, he introduced himself, and then they went back and showed, and they were ambushed. Do you remember that? So we watched just a few minutes, yeah.
So it's 5 examples for the similar situation?
Yeah, similar situations, and remember those, you show 1, give me a sentence explaining the scene from the movie, and 1 that showed, explain why it's similar. Same thing for the 2 examples of how they show the Boers. Show the scene and explain how they're showing the enemy. Because it should tell you a lot about who was making the movie and why they made it, and also why they're fighting. It really gives a good reason for that. And remember, these are Australians, but they're there for the British South Africa. And so, remember there's a Boer spy. You remember that guy? They were ambushed. And that Captain Hunt was killed. Doing good on that? Okay, someone should probably turn this on.
The screen thing was gonna be.
Oh, by the way, we've been broadcasting that entire